We're going to be talking about Christian Science tonight and how this approach to Christianity, this practice of Christianity, helps us experience God, feel God, not just talk about God, but as we think about the kind of things that are in the news, the kind of things that come to us throughout the day, the stuff we see going on in the world, how does this uplift us? How does it actually help make a difference in the world? Those are the kinds of questions we're going to be exploring together. I'm going to start by telling you two stories. And normally, as I go along, you'll see I really like to explain things, words, big words especially, like God and spirituality and healing and prayer. But when it comes to these first two stories, I'm just going to tell them the first one as I read it, and the second one as I experienced it, and then we'll do all the unpacking and the explaining and bringing it around to kind of what we're thinking about after that. So the first story is like an oldie but a goodie. It's a story from quite a few years back about a Secret Service agent who uncovered a plot to assassinate the President of the United States at the unveiling of a new monument. The president was slotted to go and give the dedicatory speech, and so the Secret Service had identified this threat, and this man, I don't know his religious background, the article I read about it didn't say that, he contacted two Christian Science practitioners in the area where this event was going to be held. A Christian Science practitioner is somebody who's available to pray with folks for healing, whatever they're facing. These two women, members of the communities, agreed. They said they'd be very happy to pray for the day, for everybody there, and they set to doing that. Well, in the end, the event went just fine. Everything was smooth, everything was safe, and it was kind of a non-event type story. The reason it stands out to me, though, the reason it became an article that I read about, was because of what the two women said about their experience praying. The first thing they wrote about, briefly, was about praying for what they were asked to pray for, which was the safety of the event and everybody there. They talked about things like seeing that it was natural for everybody, no matter what, no matter their background, to feel a unity, to feel drawn to goodness and not to harm or violence. That everybody had a direct connection with a source, God, that is good, and that that source had a power in their life and would make the difference in that day. Well, the thing that stood out to me, though, was that these two women independently also reported that they felt compelled to pray about something completely different. And it wasn't until they compared notes that they realized they had both felt compelled to pray about the same different thing. And that was what they said as they were praying came to them that, somebody in an office like the President of the United States could really feel a serious weight for having to, look after so many things and maybe feel like, your words or your actions impact so many lives for better or worse. And so the majority of the article actually talked about how they prayed about that. How they prayed about how anybody, whether it's a parent or somebody in charge of a classroom or a business owner or anybody, let alone somebody who is in charge of a bigger group of people and may feel really like, oh, there's so much I have to do, so many lives depending on me. How every single one of us has the right to feel our relationship with God as like a little kid. That all good comes from this source, that there's not like a place where you start being the one who generates good for other people. That anybody can feel buoyed, cared for, inspired, moved in any role, in any area, any walk of life. All of us have this direct connection to a source that's guiding us and inspiring us, giving us wisdom and so forth, to do what is good to do. That it's not on any one individual to figure that out. So these were the kinds of the ideas that they prayed about. Well, what stood out to me was that it was reported when the president got back from his trip and the press secretary was talking about the event and how it had gone very well. The final remarks from the press secretary were, the president says that while on this trip, he felt the lifting of a crushing mental load which descended upon him when he took the oath of office, and from which he had experienced no relief until now. So the reason that stands out to me, the reason it's why we're kicking off our discussion today, is just to get thinking a little bit about, do our prayers matter? Do our prayers for our community members matter? Do prayers for global leaders matter? In what way and how? How could that happen? How could anybody feel that if there is any kind of a connection? So we'll come back to that. We're going to push the pause button on that one for a minute. The second story is more recent and more local and part of my life. In the last year, I got a text message late at night from a dad. And the dad was texting me because his son, who was in his 20s, had called him from an emergency room in a hospital and said that he'd checked himself in because he was experiencing the effects of what he felt was probably COVID. He said he had serious pain in his lungs and difficulty breathing. They'd put him in an isolated room. He was waiting to be seen, but this is during the time period when there were a lot of people needing help. And as I got this text message and was thinking about the young man, I could also imagine the care providers running around in the hallways trying to address as many needs as possible. So he had a while to wait. Well, the dad was texting me because he had asked the son if he could pray for him and if he could invite somebody else to pray together with the two of them. The son had grown up in a Sunday school but had gotten away from religion and spirituality, had gotten into drugs and other things that had been part of that had been not so good. And the reason that stood out to me was because as I started to pray, one idea came that seemed to address not just where he was and what he was feeling and what he was going through, but some of the wider stuff that was kind of surrounding that. This is a thought that's been helpful to me a lot, actually, in the last couple of years. And it comes from a line in the Bible from St. Paul, who's addressing a very diverse crowd of people with really different ideas about God. And he says, it's in God that we live and move and have our being. Something else the Bible says is that God is love. So matching those two things up, thinking about in a love that is divine love, a love that is God itself, we live and move and have our very being. That's the atmosphere in which we live and have our being. So that was the first thought that came to me. And as I started to think about that and what it meant, it stood out to me that, well, gosh, if that's a fact, if that's true, then this guy, his health, his well-being is actually rooted in that more than in anything else. Anywhere he may have been, anything he may have been exposed to, deeper than that, more fundamental to that, more defining of his health and well-being was this relationship of living and moving and having his being in divine love, a love that gave him balance in his life and harmony in his life and wellness and peace and so forth, because that's what love does. That he could feel that love was right there with him right there and then, that was his atmosphere then. If he was afraid, if he was hurting, deeper than that, more serious than that, more defining than that was this love that was surrounding him and the power. As we just thought about that more, and I was texting just some of these little ideas to the dad who was relaying them to his son, part of what came to me was this kind of growing sense of a love that, well, gosh, if this guy in any way feels disconnected from this source of all good and love, if he in any way feels unworthy, if he feels maybe he did something to not deserve it, whatever that is, whatever actions or thoughts or things he'd been through, none of that, any more than anything else, had really changed his direct connection to this atmosphere in which he lived and moved and had his being, that this really was deeper than all of that. Nothing could scratch the surface of that, let alone, break that connection and change what really defined the core of who he was and the core of where his good came from on any level, in his character, in his health. And as we thought about that and that sense of love just kept expanding, it started kind of hitting me, wow, this big love, if that's really the atmosphere in which he lives and moves and has his being, then that's everybody's atmosphere. That anyone running around that, those hallways trying to help as many people as they possibly could, maybe also feeling kind of burdened, feeling responsible, trying to do as much as possible, maybe not feeling like it was enough. They too could feel a love that was bigger than all of that, a love that sustained them, a love that gave them courage and gave them hope, a love that gave them energy and inspiration to think in as useful a way as possible to help others, to uplift the spirits of others, to comfort others. Now, this love had to just be ever present, if that's what it was, if that's what it means to be the atmosphere in which we live and move and have our being. Well, after about 2 hours, a few text exchanges and some little check-ins, the dad wrote me back and he said that the son was feeling a lot better. The pain had completely gone away. His breathing was back to normal and natural, unlabored, and so he was feeling good. He stayed there. He waited quite a while longer. He eventually was seen. They examined him on a number of levels, and the last text message I got was that they had released him and said they could find nothing wrong with him at all. He stayed well. He continued forward, and it's been about a year, but I checked in with the dad just a couple weeks ago to see how things were going and ask if I could share the story. And he said, one thing that I didn't know about, I guess in the last year or so, this guy really kind of turned a leaf too. He's got a new job, he's moved to a new area, and he's moving forward with his life in a better way. So there's a commonality between these two stories, and that's going to be our starting point, and the commonality is prayer. In both instances, somebody was praying. Well, let's start there. What is prayer? What does that mean? In the Bible, in one of the accounts in the New Testament where we read about Jesus' life and ministry, it says that some of Jesus' students came up to him and asked him, "How do you pray?" And according to this account, the first thing he said was, "Go into your closet." And the context of that was, don't let prayer be about something you do for other people. In other words, like a show. It's not something that you perform to look good in front of others. I like to think of that go into your closet statement as like just kind of take a step back from the opinions and the preconceived notions and stuff all around you. But I also like to think of it as like take a step back from maybe your own preconceived notions, your own fears. We've all had knee-jerk reactions to something before where later on we realized with a little more information that wasn't quite right. That wasn't, there was more to the story. So it's like take a step back from that knee-jerk reaction, just the surface appearance of things, the preconceived notions and opinions. And then what Jesus talks about after that is he gives what many Christians today call the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer, in a broad way, Jesus talks about the nature of God and our relationship with God and a little bit about what that means in our lives. So if we look at this, like in the broad brushstroke, Jesus is saying take a step back from the fear and the reaction, the opinions, get focused on the nature of God and on our relationship with God and on what that means in our lives. So we all kind of get it. What does it mean to take a step back? We all know we need that sometimes. So the second part of the three little parts, if we were to look at it that way, is get focused on the nature of God. Okay, well, what is God? God is literally an infinite subject. I've been going around and sharing some ideas along these lines in the last few days here in Southern California, and as I was doing that, I was remembering how when I first started giving talks like this publicly, I spoke mostly to youth audiences, and I would always ask the kids, like, what is God to you? And I would get the best responses. I remember one kid talking about how God is like my slippers that give me comfort in the morning, and another kid was like, God is like the puppy dog that loves me no matter what. One kid from England, this was actually not a youth audience, but I asked, he was the only kid there. He raised his hand very boldly and he says, God is like Google, he's got the answer to everything. So God, there's just so many great creative ways to talk about an infinite subject. But let's look at some of the ways the Bible talks about God, and Jesus in particular. One word that Jesus used for God is spirit. Now, spirit, unlike puppy dogs, that can, puppy dogs, we get that right away. That feels very loving. But spirit can feel like just one of the most abstract and ethereal, far out kind of words. So let's just talk about that for a minute. The word spirit is an English translation of a word that in the New Testament, where Jesus' life is, it was written in Greek. And that word in Greek is pneuma, and it's translated sometimes as spirit, but it's also the same word translated as wind or breath. In fact, in the Hebrew Scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament, the Hebrew word for spirit is also the same word for wind and for breath. So for an audience who's listening to this in Jesus' time, you can kind of think about, like, in one place when Jesus is using this word spirit, he says, you don't see where the wind's coming from, and you don't see where the wind's going, but you can see the leaves moving in the trees. There's this kind of sense that, like the very air around us, God is ever present. And like life itself, in fact, the Bible says God is life itself. It's like our breath. We don't think a lot about our breath. How many people walk around going, thinking about my breath, breathing, It's not something that's on our mind too much, but if it wasn't there, we would know it really fast. So not something we see, not something we think about consciously a whole lot, but there and integral to life. That's kind of the idea of spirit in the Bible. It's not this otherworldly kind of thing so much, it seems. So God being invisible, well, that to me matches up with some of these other words in the Bible, like love. Or another word in the Bible is truth, that God is truth itself. So we don't see truth, we don't see love, but we see the effects of truth. We see the effects of love, right? When you see love expressed in acts of kindness and generosity and caring, and truth you see expressed in acts of integrity and honesty. So, truth is not something you see, but like the wind, you see the effect of it. Well, just a couple other things the Bible says. It says that God is pure good, and that God made everything that was made, and nothing was made that God didn't make. That God is the source of all wisdom and all intelligence, all beauty. And the last thing, that the same fountain doesn't send forth both fresh water and salty water. So a God that is love doesn't send forth hate. A God that is life doesn't send forth destruction and deterioration. In fact, a God like that doesn't even allow it, doesn't make room for it, doesn't use it for some greater good down the road that we just can't quite understand yet. Just like light can't send forth something other than light, like its own nature. So that's an idea about God, and there's a lot of good there, so that maybe sounds pretty good. What's the last part of Jesus' idea about praying? Taking a step back from the fear and the surface appearance, getting focused on the nature of God and on our relationship to God. Well, what is our relationship to a God like this? Well, the first thing the Bible says about any of us is that we're made in the very likeness of God. And that's not a one-off statement, actually. It comes up a number of times. Jesus said, "Be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect." St. Paul said, "Put off the old man, the old sense of yourself, and put on the new man, the new sense of yourself, which is created to be like God." One that I really love is from the Hebrew Scriptures, the Hebrew prophet Isaiah. And he writes this in a very poetic way, as if it's God talking to us. And he says, "Bring my sons from far away and my daughters from the ends of the earth, everyone who's called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made." Well, sons from far away, daughters from the ends of the earth, that's everybody, right? Anyone not included in that? No. Called by God's name. In the Bible, the name of something means the nature of something or the authority of something. Like, I come in the name of the king, the authority of the king. Formed and made by God. Again, that's good if we're talking about a God that is the source of just all good, of pure good, that is life itself. Did you hear the purpose word, the reason for my glory? Did you catch that? The word glory, to glorify something, means to make it known. We could make God known by talking about God. We could make God known by doing things in the name of God. I've talked about how you go out on the street and we all see those people with those signs sometimes, like to buy a car or whatever it is. It's like, come, it gets your attention. And we could all go out there and we could have a sign about God. We could talk about God. And the ones who are really good at it, they can flip it around, really get your attention. The really good ones can flip it up in the air and flip it behind their back. And so we could do that in order to talk about God or get attention for God. But this isn't really talking about what we say or what we do. It's talking about who we are. It's talking about our very being. We are made in the very likeness of God. We are made for God's glory. And to me, this all matches up. When you think about God is not something that we see. Love, truth, not something we see, but we see the effect of truth or the expression of truth. That would be us then. We are the place where this divine love shines through, where it takes shape, where it's made manifest. And if God is an infinite subject, that means that it's not in cookie-cutter kind of ways, but in completely unique and individual kind of a way. That love has to take form somehow. Truth has to take form somehow, and that's what we're made for. We're made to be the place where that light of God shines through. It means that if God is all of this good, it means that we're made to be free. It means that we're made to be beautiful. It means we're made to live, not to fall apart, not to suffer, not to be broken. It means we're made wise, clear-headed, just. Everybody, sons from far, daughters from the ends of the earth, everybody. This is the message. Everybody made in the very likeness of God. That God needs a place to shine through. There's a cause and there's effect, and the effect is us. That we're made whole, that we're made with just endless opportunity to be the place where good shines through and takes form. We're made with security. We're made with fairness and well, we could just talk about good adjectives for the rest of the night. We do have to move on. So purposeful. Think about anything, whatever seems to be lacking sometimes. We all get stuff that comes to us that says, well, not you, not today. Or we see a lot of good in the world, and we even see good in ourselves. But there's always this little asterisk that seems to be there too, saying, oh yeah, you're good at this stuff, but not this stuff over there. So it's whatever the little asterisk seems to be for us or for the world, what the message seems to be is no, right in the face of that, there's something more natural, more fundamental, more true about who and what we and everybody is, made in the likeness of God. But as we've already kind of started to indicate here, it's just that's not always what it looks like. I talk to people sometimes about how I use my cell phone as my alarm, which they say you're not supposed to do because you're not focused on the stuff you should be focused on when it's time to go to bed or wake up in the morning. But pick up the phone in the morning, and it's true that I do the exact thing you're not supposed to do, which is I start flipping through the news alerts and the emails and things right away. And yeah, I know I shouldn't. But when was the last time you did that or turned on the radio or the TV or whatever and saw yourself going, Channel 5, a little more glory of God. There's another story, headline, news, glory of God expressed here today. Flipping through Facebook, glory of God, glory of God, glory. That's just not, at best it looks like a good and evil story, but a lot of times it looks like the weight is more on the other side of not so good. But at the very least, this has to make us ask the question, how in the world does all this connect? This idea that there's a God that is pure good, that is life, that is beauty, that is ever present, that makes everything that was made, and nothing was made that this good didn't make. And we just flow from it, pure good. I mean, that's a great promise, but how does it connect up? to what we see and have to deal with every day. So here's where our theme comes in, of discovery. And I think this is really key. Because, a lot of folks these days, they say they're really tired. They're tired of hearing newscasters say things like, our thoughts and prayers are with them, because they figure that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't do anything. You may have heard the phrase, religion is the opiate of the masses. That's that idea that it's like, and thinking about this stuff is just like, or believing in it is like sticking your head in the sand and just ignoring reality. Or on the kinder side, people today will say, look, I got my truth and you got your truth, and if this uplifts you, if it makes you positive, if that's your tradition or something, that's great, good for you. I'm glad you feel good. But there's still this implication that it's just not that practical. So here's where the word discovery really matters to me, where I think it makes a difference. Discovery is what has progressed humanity throughout human history. Discovery, I think, kind of patterns this model of prayer that we're talking about. Because if you think about it, discovery very often flies in the face of how things have been perceived to be for a long time. And it takes kind of a step back from those preconceived notions. You think about like the laws of aerodynamics. And we all know about the Wright brothers, and you may know about Santos Dumont from Brazil and some of the other people who were working on that around the same time. Well, they were all like having to really take a step back from the way things appeared to be and the preconceived notions of things. They were having to discover something, though, that was already there, something universal. It wasn't like the philosophy of the Wright brothers and the philosophy of Santos Dumont. It was a law that was universal. And the more that law was understood, the more they could build something with it, the more they could act on it. And so there is something about like, take a step back and like look a little deeper, look beneath just the surface. Nobody first saw a plane flying through the sky and went, I have an idea, laws of aerodynamics. There was a mental wrestling. There was some, just wrestling with that concept, trying to understand it. It was like invisible, in a sense, at least in terms of how you apply it and build something with it. But the more they understood it, the more they could. There was a tangible effect that came from that. Discovery is what has progressed humanity on so many levels. We all can easily point to inventions and things, but these days when we think about the world, we're like, we need some new good inventions, but even on social level, political level, what has moved humanity is, I would say, still, we could call it discovery. Think about how women were viewed 100 years ago. And how, if you may not know this, I was astounded to find out, people, like intelligent, well-educated people, in general, thought that women were physiologically less developed men. They hadn't gotten there yet. They stopped growing or something. And imagine now a really good, kind-hearted person comes along in that era and with that kind of a worldview and says, I want to really make a difference. I'm gonna figure out a way to make these unequal people into equal people. So maybe they get to work and they create a pill or something, or some stretching exercise or something, somehow, to turn them into equal people. Would it work? No, because it starts from the wrong premise. It's a lie from the beginning. Well, what had always been true is that people are equal. So how have we made progress in human history? And I'm not saying we're done yet, but step by step, it's been a dawning where people go, they're equal already. We should change our laws to better reflect the fact of what's already true. It's a discovery, it's a dawning, and it spreads throughout society and starts to have implications on so many different levels. What was already there, what was true the whole time, is better understood, and then it's better acted on. It's better perceived. So there's this kind of I have to take a step back from all the opinions and the reactions and how things seem to be, and I have to get focused on a deeper, more fundamental truth. A truth that then I act on that makes a tangible difference in the world. To me, that's discovery. Thinking about the situation in Ukraine right now, I've been just going back and brushing up on my history and learning some things I hadn't learned before. One of these videos that I was watching that was giving a bit of a breakdown of the countries who'd left the USSR and are now generally considered Eastern European countries. It was pointing out how quickly the idea that people could take a stand for and choose democracy, how quickly that idea was spreading. One country would vote for that and they wouldn't get crushed, and then there'd be a democracy, and they'd think, the country next door, like literally the next day, would do the same thing. Wow, it's possible. And then a week later, another country would do it. One of the last countries to transition away from the USSR and communism was run by somebody who'd been a serious dictator for quite a long time. And at the point of this transition, a minister who had been speaking publicly about ideas contrary to the ruling party at the time was unjustly arrested and imprisoned. And there was this outcry. There were these protests that happened because of that. Well, the leader had been out of the country when this happened, but he came back and he decided to hold a big rally in his honor. And there was like 100,000 people there, according to this thing that I was watching. And they showed the video of the rally that day. And the leader was there, and while he was talking, the people started chanting the name of this guy again, who'd been falsely imprisoned. And the leader let it happen for a few minutes, and then he did this thing that he had done many, many times before, always with the same result. He raised his hand, and in every instance before that, when he raised his hand, the people knew, you get quiet instantly, or something bad happens. But on this day, he raised his hand, and the people kept chanting. And you can see the look on his face. He does this a couple times. And then he realizes this doesn't do anything. This doesn't have the power that I thought it had. The belief had changed. The fear was gone. There was a deeper understanding in something more real, more true, more natural, more fundamental, more universal than the belief that this had power and we had to just go with it. You see the look not just on his face, but of his little entourage behind him on the balcony. Well, about 5 days later, there'd been a transition in the government. It wasn't an easy one. That day wasn't without some violence. It can seem like you think about the way the surface level perceptions, beliefs, and the way people have acted on them, they cause suffering. It's not to deny human suffering. It's to say, how do we deal with it? Do we deal with it on the same level? Do we just start with the idea that it's a power, that it's a truth, that it's how we are, and then try and fix it based on that, the level that it's arguing itself to us? Or has humanity moved forward when it steps back from that, discovers something deeper and more fundamental, and acts on that instead? To me, that's what healing is. That's what we see going on in the Bible. The Bible is not just one book. It's written by men and women, rich and poor, different ideas about God. But you see a commonality. You see these moments where they're in the middle of war or a famine or been outcast from their community, labeled as incurable. And when they kind of take a step back from that and get focused on whatever their highest idea of God is at the time, they find some inspiration. They find some new way of looking at things. It buoys them. It lifts them up. It gives them new ideas. It saves them. It keeps them safe in the middle of war. Sometimes it even helps them save their enemies. Helps them find community again when they've been outcast. Helps them find health and wholeness again when they were labeled as incurable. Helps them find food in the middle of a famine. There's this pattern that we see going on, and I would call all of that discovery, spiritual discovery. The word spiritual comes from the word spirit. Spirit is God, so a spiritual discovery is a discovery rooted in the nature of God. What God is and what that means about us right now. What is God? What is God doing? What is God causing? And how do I act on that? What are the implications of that? So going back to these two stories that I started with, the young man who called, his dad who was in touch with me, there's a surface level logic to what was going on there, and we all get it. We've all probably experienced it on some level. We've all seen other people have experienced it. And here's one more analogy about surface level logic. If I write 5 plus 2 on my imaginary board back here, you all know that 5 plus 2 is what? 52, right? No, okay. It's what? 7, you got it. Yes, 7, you're right. But if you only know the surface level logic, like if somebody just says the plus sign means you put it together, and you don't know math, you look at it and you say 5 and 2 together is what? 52. So on a surface level, that logic makes sense. But what happens if you try and do your grocery shopping or balance your bank account with that kind of math? It's going to cause suffering. Well, so what happens when you figure out that it's 7? You get better results. It feels better. But imagine the person who's only got the surface level logic who says, hold on a second. You put a 5 and a 2 together and you get a 7? How does that happen? How does a 5 and a 2 just turn into a 7? I don't even see a 5 or a 2 in there anywhere. Well, it runs contrary to the surface appearance, but there's a law behind it. There's a principle behind it, something anybody can understand, something that you kind of, if somebody asks you that question in earnest, honestly, the best thing you can really do is just say, well, try it. Test it out. Just put it into practice for yourself and see if your grocery shopping goes a little better, you know? So the guy who called me, the surface level logic was plain. You know, if you're exposed to something and then suddenly you feel like you have the same symptoms, call it contagion, call it heredity, call it an environmental, aspects to the equation. Whatever it may be, we get it, we see that, and it causes suffering. It's not to deny that, it's not to pretend that isn't there, but it's to say, how do we deal with it? How can we get beneath just trying to fix it on the level that it appears to be, feeling stuck and trapped there and beholden to that, like there's no other way than to manage the symptoms of that? How do we get to a deeper principle and this promise that actually what defines us, actually the source from which our health, our well-being, our promise, our purpose, our goodness, our security comes from is this universal, equal, unchangeable, constant source of pure good. Again, it doesn't look like that. We all get that. But what happens when we get beneath what it looks like and just start thinking about that, exploring that, considering the implications of that, and then act on it? Well, what seemed to happen that day was that he started to feel better. He discovered something more about the health that was present, the wholeness that was natural to him, that was normal. It was more normal to feel well than to feel any other way. And that was kind of dawning. He was getting that. And that had broader implications too for other aspects of his life. To me, that's what healing is. It's not about a miracle. It's not about a far-off tribal God that likes some people, doesn't like other people, hooks some people up with good if you pray the right way or you're part of the right group, and then lets other people drift, or worse, you know. But that God is a constant, is an ever-present source, something we can discover and feel and act on a regular basis. That other story, the idea behind, how do our prayers have any effect on the well-being of others? You know, another historical thing that I was looking at recently was at the end of World War II, there were these commands given out from Hitler to some of his highest commanders in the Netherlands, in Germany, in France, that as it seemed like they were on the retreat and losing the war, that if they had to pull out, that they should never pull out, but if they had to pull out, they were to just scorched earth, depots, bridges, monuments, just blow it all up, leave nothing behind for the Allied forces to to have left. And one of the stories I was looking at most closely was of the commander who was in Paris who got this, he was told to blow up anything from the Eiffel Tower to the Louvre to the Arc de Triomphe, all of it. Imagine if those weren't here today. The command was given. If he'd just followed the orders, they wouldn't be here. But something happened. This guy got a different idea. And it wasn't just him. There was a few other people that were in key positions who also got the same command, but they just, something deep inside them knew this was not the right thing to do. And despite anything else they may have done, there was something, a light maybe, you might call it, that kept them from doing that. And at great peril to themselves. They risked a lot to kind of work together to make sure that that didn't happen. One of the reasons that stands out to me is because we kind of look at the people, we tend to think, well, there's the folks who are going to like get it. The people who are going to, we think are maybe going to do the right thing, and then the other people who we think won't. And it could be commanders, it could be just a foot soldier somewhere, it could be that essential worker down the street, it could be the family member that you don't like that much, or, your social worker, it could be anybody. But how does prayer help us take a step back and discover something a little bit more about, what God is and what God is doing and what that means about us, what it means about everybody, sons from far, daughters from the ends of the earth. There's this implication that everybody can be and should be embraced in prayer, and that it makes a difference. Why? Because if we had big windows here and the light was shining through, but there was blackout blinds on all of it, if somebody came and opened those blinds and let the light in, one person could do that, but everybody in the room, everybody in the radius of that light would get the light, would be benefited by that. And that to me is a little bit like what prayer is. Anytime we're embracing our community, our globe, the folks in that, just the radius of that prayer, it's like bringing the light to bear on what is ultimately, fundamentally untrue, or at the very least just not as powerful, not as rooted in what is normal and natural and unavoidable. When somebody writes a new law, they don't go out and talk to every single person to make sure that that law applies to them. The law has a scope that affects everybody under the umbrella of that law. And to me, prayer can kind of be like that. Prayer is like it's a way of discovering a law or something that is just an unavoidable universal truth. And that it's not, we can't go out and talk to everybody and convince everybody, but our prayers can see that truth is already there. That God is already communicating. That each individual is already inherently receptive to that. And that it has an effect not because we're so good at praying or because our prayer has little like magic juju that goes out and affects anybody, but because truth recognized, truth understood, spreads. It has an impact. Truth itself undoes, obliterates that which is not rooted in truth. Acknowledging it, understanding it is like it's like a law that is letting the light of what is true shine forth on what is not true. And it has an invisible but a tangible, normalizing kind of an effect. So when we look out and we see people that seem angry, maybe we feel like the ones that are angry or confused or tricked or lost or like we don't know how to deal with stuff in the world. Any one of us can take that step back. Now, wait a second. But what is God making me to be? What is God doing? It's a discovery. It's not just like, we're not just talking about willing this to happen. We're not talking about like affirmations of like, I know it, I believe it. You can't talk yourself into truth. You don't need to. It's actually kind of the opposite of that. It's like, it's more of a humility. It's more of it can start with incredulousness sometimes. You read something in the Bible, and what do you mean God's ever present, And that's okay. That's an okay first reaction, but don't leave it there. Wrestle with it. Let it talk to you. Consider the implications of it. The onus is on what is true to convince us, The onus is what is on true to lift us, to inspire us, to shed light on how we think and how we see things. We always get to be the kids in this equation. As we feel it inspiring us and moving us, then we take a stand, right? In the face of things that tempt us away or make us lose hope, we can get back to the rock that we've discovered and stand on it, build on it. But we never have to feel like we're generating that rock, that we're the cause of that rock. And when it feels a little precarious, we get to go back and discover more. What is God? What is God doing? What is God causing? The bottom line, good is real. Good is present. Good has power. Good is not weak. Good is with everyone, in everyone. There is not a trajectory in humanity that is apart from good, that is in conflict with good. There's not a battle with good. Good is the force. Good is the reality. Good is what's normal. And that runs contrary to how things appear to be, but each one of us can just discover more of that until that incredulousness kind of turns to awe. Wow. Consider if that's true. It's letting it wash over us and lift us and set us free. Step by step. It's just little by little, moment by moment. We don't have to take on the burdens of the world, but whatever comes to us in any moment with what we see or what's on the news, it's just in that moment. Whatever that is, right in that moment, okay, God, what are you? What are the implications of your nature right now? What does that show me? How does that free me up? How does it tell me how to act right now? Sometimes very quietly, sometimes just in my own space, but sometimes in ways that are bold, that make a difference in really visible ways. So the how, what is the power behind this? I want to just, before we answer that, I want to read you this quote here. This is from Science and Health, the Key to the Scriptures. This is the textbook of Christian Science. So this is by the author Mary Baker Eddy, who founded this movement, this approach to what we're talking about tonight. And she wrote, "The conceptions of mortal, erring thought must give way to the ideal of all that is perfect and eternal. Through many generations, human beliefs will be attaining diviner conceptions, and the immortal and perfect model of God's creation will finally be seen as the only true conception of being." She starts the next sentence with the word science. She's talking about the science of Christ. She says, "It reveals the possibility of achieving all good and sets mortals at work to discover what God has already done." That's kind of the promise. That's what we're talking about. So again, what is the how? What is the impetus here, the force? In a word, Christ. And you probably know that Christ wasn't just the last name of Jesus. Like if it had a driver's license, it wouldn't have said Jesus Christ. Mr. Christ, table for one. I don't mean to, downplay that. What I mean is that word Christ is so much more significant than just a passing kind of, surname or something. It symbolized something so significant in human history. It symbolized the way that the presence and activity of God shone through the life of Jesus so significantly, so uniquely in human history. That presence and activity of God, that Christ power, of course, that didn't just start when Jesus arrived or end when Jesus left. It's ever present, like God is ever present. God is ever present, so God's action and God's power is ever present, here with us right now. That Christ power is now. That Christ power is everywhere. Jesus showed us something unique about grace. And grace, in a short phrase, could be said anyway to be the unearned love of God. And why is it unearned? Because it's already there. You don't have to earn 5 + 2 = 7, right? And you're not going to get along somewhere where you're like, well, it's been a long time, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. It's just not quite 7 for me anymore. Right? It's just a fact. 5 and 2, 7, it's just something that is. The good of God is just something that is. The presence of God, the action of God is just something that is. It's the unearned love of God because it just is. There's nothing, we don't make it, we don't earn it, we don't work our way up to it, and there's not something we can do to mess it up. There's nothing that anyone can do or ever has done to mess it up. Grace is that unearned love of God. It's the good that is already there and is always there, always going to be there. Jesus showed us something unique about salvation. And in a very short phrase, we could say that salvation is the discovery of that unearned love of God, that unbroken relationship with God, that we can never be separated from the love of God. So Jesus showed us, too, what real power looks like. That it's not through force, it's not through human will. He talked about characteristics like mercy, meekness, purity, hungering and thirsting after righteousness. Why? Because it's when we take a step back from those other models of things and start to discover what God is and what God is doing, that Christ presence, that's when the power of God shines through. That's the light. It's never self-generated. It lifts us up. And it's what's acting all around us. Our role, I would say, is pioneering. I don't think there's such a thing as Christianity without pioneering. I don't think it exists. We have to be pioneers, and that means we're listening, step by step, moment by moment, discovering something new about what God is and what God is doing. We have ways we've been inspired before, and that's great. That's our rock. That's the land that's been traversed, and we can be grateful for those who have come before us and how that buoys us and gives us waymarks for how to go forward. But every single individual, I think the lesson here is we don't always know how this is going to play out tomorrow, but we do know that whatever we're discovering about God is going to give us the information to take the next step. It's the next innovation. It's the next breakthrough idea. It's the next thing that meets the needs of humanity, because that's what Christ is. It's the true idea of God coming to human thought, coming to human experience. No matter who we are, where we are, how muddled up things seem to be, right there, and just the way that we can hear it, and just the way we need it, even if it's not in religious language or whatever, it doesn't matter. It's the same light of God that meets human thought and opens the way, the next step to go forward. Why are we pioneers? Because that next idea, we don't always know how it's going to play out. If we did, we wouldn't be pioneers. You know, I mean, if you already know what it's going to look like, then somebody told you. They were there, and they came back and let you know. So every day, it's like, how do I give my consent? How do I just be willing? How do I wake up in the morning and take each step during the day saying, I consent to learn more today. I consent to discover something brand new about God's nature today. God being an infinite subject, meaning there's always more, something brand new, and not just generally, but specific, right in the face of whatever it is seems to be coming at us, right there, right then. What more about God just makes me stand in awe and go, oh, I see. I have a new idea. I have an idea of what to think. I have an idea of how to act. I didn't have that idea before. I didn't wake up in the morning knowing that was going to happen. That's pioneering. But it takes an active just giving our consent. Mary Baker Eddy, again, the founder of this movement, she wrote about praying not to forget to do that. So we might say, hey, that's a great idea. But then how often do we go, yeah, but then my day gets going, and then, I just kind of forget. But we can deal with that. We can take a step back from that pattern too. And we can discover that God being ever present is giving us what we need so that we don't forget, so that we don't neglect, to just tune in, to just give our consent to discover something new and be moved step by step today. Mary Baker Eddy, who founded this movement, it's been a grassroots healing movement from the beginning. There's not a hierarchy. It's about that direct connection, that direct demand, in a way, on all of us to discover something new. She found healing from chronic illness in her life and healing from the effects of a severe accident from which many people didn't expect her to recover. She found a way to move forward as a woman who lived in the 1800s, primarily into the 1900s, at a time when it was actually considered immoral for women to speak publicly, certainly on things like spirituality and religion. But imagine somebody who, like all of us, we all have stuff. There's some storyline, right? Whether it's about our family, our skin color, our economics, our education, the community in which we live, our culture. It's something like that's coming to everybody. But in the face of it, this woman, if there's one thing I would say about her that strikes me the most is that she reasoned spiritually. Each thing that came up, the more she discovered about what God is and what that means in our lives, she didn't say, well, what does the world think about women? Well, then what should I do today? It was, what does the world need? And what is God? And what does that mean about me? What does that mean about what I can do? Okay, I'll do that. She didn't set out to even overturn the apple cart per se, but it was inevitable that the apple cart, if it had rotten apples in it, wasn't going to stand in her way. And that's true about any great spiritual pioneer. She founded a movement because what she discovered and ultimately called Christian Science, the science of Christ, that is a way of looking at the teachings and the life and the example of Jesus and saying the heart of it, the truth of it has to be timeless, and it has to be universal, and it has to be understandable, and it has to be provable for everybody. It healed her. And then she helped and she healed other people. And then they went and they helped and they healed other people. And then they went and they helped and healed other people. And so truth spreads, a truth that is universal and absolutely equal and equally accessible to everybody. She wrote this book that I've already read to you from, Science and Health, the Key to the Scriptures. She wrote other books, but this is the primary book that explains Christian Science. That is, how the message of the Bible applies in our lives today, how we can really understand it, how we can make it relevant and act on it and prove it. The last 100 pages of this book are all stories of people who found significant transformational healing in their lives, often including things that were labeled as incurable, and they were healed, completely healed of that. She founded a church. You're sitting in a branch of one. But church was not the place where you go to get God. It was not, again, we're kind of leveling the playing field of any sense of hierarchy, any sense of anyone here waiting on somebody else, or really getting to wait on anybody else. That each one of us has that direct connection with God. It doesn't come through a building or an organization. Well, why an organization then? Well, because we can do more together for our communities and in supporting one another than we can do separately. That community aspect has always been an important part of what it means to just live and practice and better understand this step by step. She started magazines that are still around today, 100 years later, where everyday people write in. One's a weekly, one's a monthly, and they talk about what they're discovering spiritually and how they're finding healing in their lives. At 87 years old, she started an international news source. 87. How many 87-year-olds do you know who are like, on my list today? Yeah, international news source. Let's do it. Okay. John, let's go. But again, let's just talk about what it's like for any single person to reason spiritually. In her time, journalism was in a bad place, and it was not reliable. And she was thinking, you can't be a healer in the world if you don't have accurate information of what's going on so that you can begin to really deal with it. So she saw a need, and she just prayed that through and thought, okay, well, what does that mean, and what can I do? Age didn't come into it, gender didn't come into it, the times didn't come into it, money didn't come into it. It was just, what's the need? Okay, God, what does that mean? What is your nature? What does that look like? And then she acted on it. That's for everybody. There's never a point where we retire from that. There's never a point where we're like, okay, got that. My bunny slippers are on, my bonbons, and I'm comfortable from here on out. It's like every day we get to just do this thing, like it's kind of an eternal thing. But you know what's so good about that? is that every day we're listening and being inspired and lifted up and moved is every day some little weight is coming off our back. This is not the process of taking on the world. This is not the process of like, oh, I got to get there. I got to be the one that makes this happen. If it feels like that, take a step back. Even if it comes in Bible language or whatever, your faith tradition, take a step back. That cannot be the feeling of what it's really like to be moved moment by moment, day by God, in the face of any other criteria that says, this is who I am or what I do or what I feel like doing. It's relieving. It's enlightening. It comforts us and it inspires us and it gives us new information and it cares for us. We are, like I said before, always the kids in this equation. When we engage with texts like the Bible or this book, Science and Health, we look for the ideas to jump off the page and do something with us. Instead of us thinking, how do I take something here and go apply it to my problem? How does it change the way we see things? How does truth itself deal with the error, the misconception, in the bad data, to be dealt with? Jesus said, whoever follows me will do the works that I do. There's always been this promise that it would be normal, it would be natural to follow and to get similar results. He said the Spirit of truth is coming and will guide you into all truth, will lead you into an understanding, will help you remember what I've said and do the things that I've done. And that's what Mary Baker Eddy felt Christian Science is. It's that idea of how to really understand and experience God coming to humanity and helping us prove that, every one of us. I'm going to read you a line here from the Bible. I'm going to tell you one last story, and then we'll wrap up. This is from St. Paul in the Bible, and he writes, "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely." As we look out, whether it's at our families or our churches or our community or our government, local or national or any other thing, conflicts in other parts of the world, it can look like that. It can look like that distorted kind of a mirror. But the promise here, again, is what's good is already present. What's good is there to be discovered. What's normal, what's natural is there to be acted on. And step by step, any one of us, wherever we are, wherever we feel we are in that equation, it's the light that shines through our prayer that makes the difference because it has that power. Truth has the power to undo what is untrue. And prayer is bearing witness to that. So this last story is, I chose it, I've told it the last couple days, and it's because I know the thought comes to us, again, kind of like, well, how do I know my prayer does any good? Or what if I just don't know how to pray? Hey, that all sounds pretty good, and you sound like you know maybe some things, but what about me? We all have that thought. Literally, everybody. It's always something knocking at the door saying, something's in your way, not you, not today. The other thing that I think comes to us sometimes is, well, I don't know everyone out there who needs help today. I don't know who's screaming at who on the freeway. I don't know when the next kid with a gun's going to show up and shoot at somebody. How do I pray? How do I know how to help? So here's my story. This is a story from when I was in high school. A friend of mine came over to my house once in a while in the mornings to catch a ride with me to school. We weren't like super close, we didn't hang out all the time, but once in a while we did, and especially on a day that rained or something like that, he would come. Well, one day he showed up really early in the morning. I wasn't up yet, and so he walked around the side of the house and he knocked on my bedroom window, and I went and I let him in. And he said, "Oh, I had to get out of the house. I wanted to come here early. I hope you don't mind." And I said, "Hey, that's fine." This guy, he had pretty tough growing up. His home situation wasn't good at all. There's really difficult things going on there that he'd told me about, and it was anything but a peaceful kind of an environment for him. And so I said, hey, that's fine. I have to grab my stuff and I have to get ready. So I grabbed my things, I went into the bathroom, and I realized I'd forgotten something. And so I went back to my room, and I opened the door, and he was in there, and he was sitting in a chair, and he had a knife out. And he'd been running that knife up and down his arm, and there was some scratches. But when I walked in, he folded it up real quick, and he put it in his pocket. And I said, what's going on? And he said, oh, nothing, man. I was just messing around, and look, I probably did that a little too hard. I shouldn't have done that. Don't worry about it. It's cool. Well, I wasn't comfortable, but I didn't know what to say. And so I just said, are you sure? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay. And I left it there. And I grabbed my stuff, and I went back to the bathroom. Well, when I was in the shower, the thought came to me, there's something really wrong. And I felt like, I don't know what to do about that. I'm here, he's in there, I don't know what's going on, I don't understand, I don't know what I would do even if I knew what was going on. Again, hence the story, because these are the kind of thoughts that come to all of us. And so I'm going to tell you what I started to feel after I began my best idea of how to pray in that moment. I'm going to put it into words that I have now, looking back on it in hindsight. I didn't have those words then. It was more of a feeling. What I can tell you is that I felt desperate and that I just started reaching out. I started reaching out for something bigger than myself, something deeper, something higher, to God. What do I do? What do I know? What's going to help right now? Well, what started to come to me was in some ways a little similar to what came to me as I prayed for that guy in the first story I told you about, that there was a God there. That this God is love. That was the first thought, that love is present. And I kind of said, okay, what does that mean? And that idea of love started to grow. That love is present. That love is in the room right now. That love is what has the power right now. That love is what is talking to him. That love is what defines him, not his family, not where he's been, not the kind of place he's been living in, not what he's gone through, but love. Love defines him. Love is the cause. Love is the impetus. Love is what is generating what happens next. Love is the creator. Love is who and what built him. So he's made to know love. He's made to feel love. He's made that way. He's made receptive. He's made responsive. He couldn't be in any other way. Built into him is just his inherent, unavoidable nature to hear love, to know love, and to respond to love's guidance. That love was the power, that there was nothing else, no sadness, no frustration that could outweigh it. There wasn't a combat. There wasn't light and darkness opposing one another. There was light. There was an all-defining goodness, and that even though it looked and felt like, oh my gosh, but, it was just like I kept coming back to and wrestling with this idea, but if there is a love and that love is ever present, what does that mean? Every time a new thought would come that say, yeah, but, it was like, hold on, but what does that mean in light of the kind of love we're thinking about? It was just a feeling. It was this internal wrestling, but love, the light was winning, and it was starting to just any shadow of doubt, of darkness, of fear was starting to fade before a sense that love was really the deal. It just was. It just was there. It's what mattered. It was the power. And that he could feel that. He could feel that through and through. That's all there was to him. It was the only here that was here. It was the only him that was him. It was the only power that was power. And as that love became so big to me, and it comforted me, I was able to feel a peace and go forward and finish getting ready to go. And when I was all done, I went back to the room and I opened the door, and he was in there. He'd fallen asleep in the chair. So I woke him up. We had a bowl of cereal. We got in the car. We were driving to school. We were most of the way there when he said to me, I have something to tell you. And I said, okay. He said, I want you to know that I came to your house this morning to commit suicide. And he said, I wanted to do it at your house because I feel peaceful here. And I wanted to go somewhere where I would feel at peace. He said, when you left the room the second time, I got my knife back out and I was going to do it. And he told me how. He said, there's ways you can do it where you can be saved and other ways where you can't be saved. He said, I'm going to do it in the way you couldn't be saved. But then he said, then something happened. He said, I can't really explain it, but just a peace came over me. And he said, I felt like I just didn't need to do that anymore. He said, it just all went away. It's gone. And he said, it's completely gone. And he said, I just want you to know, you don't have to worry about me. That's never going to happen. I know it. I know it on a deep level. And I felt that. I could feel that, I don't think either one of us had words, but it was a feeling. And it was clear. He was just full of that feeling of being worthy, being needed, being loved. That there was a way forward, that he wasn't trapped by how things had seemed to be. And he saw that. He saw the path, and he saw he could walk in it. Well, we went on to school. I expressed gratitude, but didn't say a whole lot else. And he went forward from there. Again, we're not the closest friends, but he's still around. I see him on Facebook, and he's doing just fine. So as we look out and we think, how do I reach people? What do I do? How do I know? To me, again, the message hopefully is clear at this point. The prayer that has helped me the most sometimes is, thank God it's not about me. It's like a sense of a me that is separate from God, that has to self-generate something. It's like, oh, right. And I can't tell you, I feel like every 10 minutes I rediscover that and go, oh, yeah, that's right. Oh, that's good. I'm so grateful. It's a growing sense in the face of every little thought. And life seems to be compartmentalized sometimes. Like, oh, yeah, I get this, but I also am believing this at the same time. And what's happening is day by day is that compartmentalization is deteriorating, and the oneness, the allness, the unity of what is good and all defining is growing and spreading out over everything and over every thought and over every temptation and over every frustration until it just overtakes it. This is the trajectory of humanity. This is what's going on. And we don't know everybody out there who needs help. But our prayers can embrace every single person. Our prayers can embrace the fact that everybody has their direct connection with God. That can be uplifted, that people can see a right, a useful, a progressive way forward, whether that's in immediate, emergency situations or situations that have been burdened by darkness or sadness for a long time, or facing things like climate change where we need not just a solution now, but long-term solutions, new ideas, innovations, creative things, whole societies to move. Where does that come from? It comes from where it has always come from. When humanity gets ideas and those ideas spread and things change, and they can change in a flash because an idea can just shift the whole landscape in a moment. And our prayers can bear witness to that. Our prayers lift us up, and then we see that a grace that is that loving and that unconditional has to be embracing the whole world. These last two lines from the Bible on Science and Health, back to Paul, he writes, "See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation." Now. Now is the day. Salvation, again, maybe being said as the discovery that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Now is the day. Of course it is. Moment by moment. It's the good that already is. Step by step. Like I said before, just on whatever's on our radar at the moment. We don't have to take on all the issues of the world. What comes to us when we give our consent and when we're willing, we move. Our communities move. The stuff that matters, it's uplifted and moved by the light of God. And Mary Baker Eddy wrote in Science and Health, "It's possible, yea, it's the duty and privilege of every child, man and woman, to follow in some degree the example of the Master by the demonstration of truth and life, of health and holiness. So it's possible because it's built in to all of us. It's our privilege and our duty, not a heavy duty, but an opportunity every single day. And it's for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, child, man, woman, and you could put all the other things on there. It's just because of what God is and what God makes every single one of us to be. It's what empowers us to follow the example of the Master, as Jesus promised we could do. Walking step by step, getting the same kind of results. And when we don't, that's okay. Take a step back. Learn the next thing. Learn a little bit more about God that addresses the thing that seems to make it feel hard. Feel lifted from that, and then take the next step from there. The result is the demonstration of truth, of life, of health and holiness. So, thank you. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being the place where the light shines through. Each of you in your own unique way. You're needed. Thanks for letting the light shine. Thanks for your prayers. Thanks for taking the time to just discover a little bit more each day. The world has need of you. And thanks for taking the time to come tonight and to think through these ideas together. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care. Thank you.